The mission had been flawless, or so it seemed. In the depths of the galaxy's most secure sector, the Empire's central logistics hub stood like a fortress, protected by an impenetrable network of satellites and automated defense systems. For most, it would have been a suicide mission. But for the Saboteurs, it was just another day at the office. Aboard their stealth ship, the Silent Fang, the team of operatives moved with precision. Each member had their role. Eris, the tech expert, disabled the surveillance systems, rendering them blind to the outside world. Kale, the tactical genius, calculated their every move, ensuring they avoided detection by the Empire's formidable fleet. Mara, the Silent Blade, was their infiltration specialist. Her job was to slip through the cracks and leave nothing but destruction in her wake. As the ship neared its target, the team's leader, known only as the Architect, stood at the helm, watching the planetscape through the viewports. A man of few words, the Architect had a reputation, cold, calculating, and brilliant. He had orchestrated this entire operation from the shadows, pulling the strings and directing each move with an expertise that bordered on the supernatural. To the rest of the galaxy, he was a myth. To his team, he was a god of strategy and deception. "Are we ready?" The Architect's voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp. His gaze never left the holographic map floating in front of him. "Almost," Eris replied, his fingers dancing over the controls. "We're in position. Shielding is up. They won't even know we're here." Mara adjusted the weapons at her side, her fingers tight around the hilts of her dual blades. Her cold expression revealed nothing, but the faintest flicker of anticipation passed through her eyes. Kale, scanning the data feeds, gave a tight nod. "We've got a window. 30 minutes, no more." The Architect studied the data for a moment before he turned to face the team. "We're not here to make noise. We strike fast, we strike hard, and we leave nothing for the Empire to follow. Understood?" The team nodded in unison. They descended toward the heart of the Empire's military operations, their target a massive communications relay that fed vital intelligence to the Emperor's warlords. If they could cripple the Empire's command and control network, even for a few hours, it would send shockwaves through their entire infrastructure. 1,000 small rebellions would sprout in the wake of the disruption, like sparks in a dry forest. They touched down on the surface, a barren, moon-like world with no natural resources and little to offer except for the Empire's sprawling industrial complex. The Saboteurs disembarked in perfect silence, moving like ghosts through the shadows of the enemy's stronghold. Every step was calculated, every breath controlled. There was no room for error. Inside the complex, armed guards patrolled the hallways, unaware of the threat that was about to dismantle their entire world. Mara's blades flashed in the darkness, and 2 guards fell without a sound. Kale followed close behind, planting explosives with military precision. Eris accessed the control systems, his fingers moving faster than the Empire's own security protocols could react. One by one, the Empire's communication lines went dark. But just as the last line was severed, a cold chill ran down the Architect's spine. Something wasn't right. He could feel it, like the faintest vibration in the air, a distant warning. He turned to his team. "Move," he ordered, his voice ice-cold. Mara gave him a questioning look, but she didn't hesitate. With a swift nod, she darted down the hallway, her team following closely. As they made their way back to the extraction point, the silence around them deepened, as though the galaxy itself held its breath. The Architect's mind raced. This mission wasn't supposed to be this easy. Something was watching them. But for now, they had succeeded. The Empire's nerve center had been severed from the rest of the galaxy. As they boarded the Silent Fang and prepared to leave, the Architect allowed himself the briefest of smiles. The first strike had been a success. The Empire would never know what hit them. But deep inside, a nagging doubt remained. This was only the beginning. The silence of space wrapped around the Silent Fang as it drifted through the outskirts of the Empire's territory, a shadow among the stars. The Saboteurs had accomplished their mission, severing the Empire's central communications for a critical window of time. But the aftershocks were already being felt. The Empire, once confident in its ability to control the galaxy with an iron grip, was beginning to fray at the edges. Their communications were down, their strategic movements hindered, and for the first time in years, there was uncertainty in their ranks. Back aboard their hidden base, located on the moon of an uncharted world, the team gathered in the dimly lit command room. The tension was palpable. They had succeeded, but now came the hard part, maintaining the momentum. Eris sat at the control station, his fingers a blur as he monitored the rising chaos. "It's working," he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. "Local uprisings are spreading across the sector. We've hit a nerve." Kale leaned over his shoulder, scanning the data with sharp eyes. "The Empire's scrambling. They're trying to contain the damage, but their resources are stretched thin. A few more moves like this, and they'll be too spread out to retaliate effectively." Mara paced near the back of the room, her eyes narrowed, scanning the dim horizon outside the base's viewport. "It's too quiet. This kind of disruption, this sudden loss of control, it doesn't just fade away. The Empire will find us." The architect stood silently near the control table, arms folded, eyes distant. He was always calm, but the faintest trace of something he hadn't felt in years, whispered in the back of his mind. A sense of danger, a threat that couldn't be pinpointed. His instincts were sharp, honed over years of leading covert operations. But this felt different. "You're right," he said after a long pause, his voice cool and measured. "The Empire will respond, but not in the way we expect." He turned to face the rest of the team, eyes locked on each of them in turn. "We've made our mark. Now we need to disappear. For a while, at least, we'll lay low, allow the rebellion to spread, and wait for the Empire to make its next move. Our role now is to guide the chaos, not control it. If we stay hidden long enough, they'll start to fracture." Eris scowled. "I don't like it. We've got the momentum. We can keep striking, keep pushing. Why wait?" The architect's gaze was unyielding, because the Empire isn't just a behemoth of military might. It's a web of factions, each vying for power. And when they begin to fight amongst themselves, we'll have an opportunity to strike the heart of their infrastructure. But for that, we need time and patience. We've started something, but it's not over yet. Kale folded his arms, thinking. "And how do we know they won't crush us before we have the chance?" "Because they won't expect us to be where they're looking," the architect replied, his voice a low whisper. "We've always operated in the shadows. We'll continue to do so. But there's something more we need, something hidden in the heart of the Empire's military. Information that can cripple them permanently. We need a key." Mara's eyes gleamed as she stepped forward. "You're talking about an artifact, something more than just a weapon." The architect nodded slowly. "Yes, and it's more than a weapon, it's a symbol. A key to unlocking the true power the Empire has kept hidden. We don't know everything about it yet, but I've traced its location, and I've made arrangements for us to infiltrate the capital." The room fell silent as the weight of his words settled over them. "We go in fast, we go in quiet," the architect continued, his voice cold with determination. "This mission will be different. We won't just be sabotaging their resources, we'll be undermining the very foundation of their power. Once we have it, everything changes." Eris turned back to the console, typing furiously as he cross-checked the data. "We've got a lead, but I'm telling you now, getting to this artifact won't be easy. The Empire's capital is locked down tighter than anything we've faced before." Kale nodded, eyes narrowing. "Then it's a good thing they've never faced us before." With the plan set in motion, the team began to prepare. The stakes were higher now than ever before. No longer would they just be shadows in the dark. They would become the ghosts that haunted the Empire's nightmares. As the Saboteurs readied themselves for the next phase of their mission, one question echoed in the back of their minds. What kind of power had the Empire kept hidden, and how far were they willing to go to keep it? The architect's voice broke the silence once again. This is just the beginning. Prepare yourselves. The Empire has no idea what's coming. The days following the communication sabotage passed in a blur of cautious preparation and tense anticipation. The saboteurs had gone into hiding, keeping their movements small and deliberate, careful to avoid detection by the Empire's ever-watchful eyes. But as the architect had predicted, the Empire was already mobilizing. Their forces had spread thin, hunting down resistance cells and attempting to regain control, but the cracks in their armor were starting to show. The mission to infiltrate the Empire's capital and retrieve the artifact had been set in motion. The Saboteurs' plan was both simple and audacious: strike fast, leave no trace, and disappear before the Empire could even process what had happened. But simplicity was a luxury when dealing with the Empire's elite forces, and as the team studied the layout of the Imperial capital, they realized how deep the challenge ran. The capital was a sprawling, heavily fortified megalopolis, a place where even the most innocuous movements were under constant surveillance. The city was built to protect its secrets the saboteurs were about to break wide open. Their goal was the Imperial Vault, a place few had ever seen and fewer still had returned from. Inside that vault, they believed, was the artifact that would give humanity the edge they needed in the fight for freedom. But retrieving it wasn't going to be as easy as sneaking past guards. Kale, always the strategist, laid out the initial approach. We'll need to split up. Mara and I will infiltrate the outer security grid. Eris, you'll work from the inside to disable their alarms. The architect, you're on the final extraction. The architect studied the holographic map, tracing the path with his fingers. His mind was already working through contingencies. He saw everything, every guard post, every blind spot, every route to the vault. I want the entire team to stay connected, the architect ordered. Communication is key. If one of us is compromised, we all go dark and regroup. No heroics. This isn't a mission for glory. It's a mission for survival. With the plan set, the saboteurs boarded the Silent Fang once more, their stealth ship gliding toward the capital's orbit. The tension inside the ship was palpable, each member lost in their thoughts. Mara, ever the calm one, was double-checking her gear, adjusting her blades. Kale reviewed his tactics once more, ensuring that every angle was covered. Eris, hunched over his console, was already hacking into the capital's outer defense grid, preparing to create the opening they needed. As they entered the capital's atmosphere, the hum of the ship's engines was the only sound in the quiet, metallic hull. Every heartbeat felt like a countdown. They would be landing in the heart of enemy territory. One wrong move, and the Empire would bury them under an avalanche of firepower. Once on the ground, the team split into two groups. Mara and Kale, their movements as fluid as shadows, slipped past the outer security perimeter, using the cover of night to move undetected. The city was alive with activity, Imperial forces moving from one location to another, patrolling the darkened streets. But Mara and Kale had seen this before. Every guard, every shift, every security checkpoint was an obstacle to be bypassed. Meanwhile, Eris accessed the city's central network, bypassing encryption layers with ease. His fingers flew over the holographic interface, disabling alarms, redirecting surveillance feeds, and ensuring the team's movements went unnoticed. He felt the pressure mounting, the weight of the Empire's watchful gaze pressing down on him, but there was no room for hesitation. He had been trained for this. As the minutes passed, the team closed in on their target, the vault. It was located deep beneath the Imperial Palace, surrounded by layers of reinforced security and guarded by the Empire's most elite forces. But the architect knew that the harder the challenge, the greater the reward. And the artifact they sought was no mere object. It was the key to unraveling everything the Empire had worked to build. The final phase of the operation was approaching, and the tension had never been higher. The saboteurs were inside, and they were about to make their move. But as they drew closer to the vault, something shifted in the air, an unsettling sensation, as if they were being watched. "We've been compromised," Mara's voice crackled through the comms, calm but sharp. The architect's heart skipped a beat. "Abort the mission, now." But it was too late. The sound of footsteps echoed from the corridors ahead. The Empire's elite forces, known as the Wraiths, had found them. The saboteurs had walked straight into a trap. A deadly game of cat and mouse had begun. The architect's mind raced. The Wraiths, the Empire's most lethal and stealthy soldiers, were not a force to be trifled with. These elite operatives had been trained to hunt and kill without leaving a trace, and they had one mission: eliminate anyone who posed a threat to the Empire's secrets. "We're not alone," Mara's voice came through the comms, sharp and filled with urgency. "They're on our tail. Multiple signatures, closing in fast." The architect's pulse quickened, but he remained calm. Panic was the enemy. Focus was the key. "Kale, Eris, fall back to extraction point. Mara, stay close to me. We'll fight our way through if necessary. Stay tight and don't lose communication." The team moved as one, but even as they did, the walls of the Imperial Palace seemed to close in around them. Every hallway felt narrower, every corner more dangerous. The Wraiths were relentless, silent, unforgiving. Kel's voice crackled through the comms. "We're not going to make it to the extraction point without a fight. We'll have to hold our ground." "Agreed," the architect replied, his tone grim. "Prepare for a last stand." They found cover near a large set of double doors leading deeper into the vault complex. The palace's thick walls shielded them from immediate detection, but that was about to change. The Wraiths were closing in from all sides, and the slightest misstep would send them straight into the enemy's crosshairs. "Kale, Eris, take the first two hallways and set traps," the architect ordered. "Mara with me." He could hear their breathing over the comms, steady but filled with tension. He turned to Mara. "Stay sharp. We can't let them take us alive." Mara gave a sharp nod. She had fought alongside the architect for years, and she trusted his judgment implicitly. But she wasn't used to being cornered. It was a dangerous feeling, one that made even the most experienced warriors uneasy. A series of muffled footsteps echoed from the hallway beyond the doors. "They're close," Mara whispered, her eyes scanning the shadows. The architect crouched low, his hand resting on his weapon, a sleek black rifle designed for silent kills. He gestured for Mara to move left while he positioned himself on the right. They had a few moments, maybe seconds, before the Wraiths would be upon them. Through the crack in the door, the architect saw movement. Dark figures slipping in and out of the shadows, moving with the grace of predators. The Wraiths were already inside. They were patient, methodical. They knew the saboteurs wouldn't run. They knew the saboteurs would fight. "Kale, Eris, set them off now." The architect snapped, and almost immediately, the explosion of pressure mines filled the corridor with a deafening crack. The Wraiths shrieked in surprise as the shockwave knocked two of them off their feet. But there were too many. The saboteurs took their chance. Mara darted forward, her blades flashing in the dim light. A Wraith appeared from the corner, and before he could react, she was upon him, her twin blades cutting through his armor like paper. The body crumpled silently to the floor. But the others didn't stop. The fight had just begun. The architect raised his rifle and fired, the low hum of the silenced shots cutting through the chaos. A Wraith dropped, but another appeared in his place. "Keep moving," the architect barked as he scanned for an exit. They were getting surrounded, and the pressure was mounting. The vault was close, just a few more meters, but they had to break free from this ambush before they could make their final push. Eris's voice echoed in their ears, tinged with anxiety. I've triggered the lockdown. The vault is sealed, but we've got wraiths coming from every direction. We need to move now." The architect cursed under his breath. The wraiths were never meant to be a part of this operation, not until they were ready to extract the artifact. Now they were in the thick of it, with no way to avoid the enemy's deadly pursuit. "Mara, we need to push through," the architect commanded, his eyes locking with hers. "Kale, cover us. We're making a run for it." Without hesitation, Mara and the architect bolted for the vault's inner sanctum. They could hear the wraiths regrouping behind them, their footsteps rhythmic and purposeful. They were relentless, like shadows, always closing in. The team pushed forward, but the weight of the fight was taking its toll. Every move felt like it was being watched. Every hallway seemed longer, as if the palace itself was conspiring against them. And then the doors to the inner vault slid open. The artifact was within reach, but at what cost? The saboteurs had made it this far, but the hardest part of the mission was only just beginning. The doors to the inner vault slid open with a hiss, revealing a vast circular chamber. Inside, the room was bathed in an eerie bluish glow, its walls lined with holographic displays and encrypted security systems that hummed with a low, ominous vibration. It was clear the Empire had spared no expense in guarding whatever lay within. The air was thick with the scent of ancient technology and untold secrets. Mara and the architect moved quickly, their eyes scanning every inch of the chamber, every corner, every shadow. They had made it this far, but the sense of danger hadn't diminished. In fact, it had grown more palpable. The wraiths were still closing in, their relentless pursuit a constant pressure on the saboteurs' every move. "We've got one shot at this," the architect said, his voice low and steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Mara, secure the artifact. I'll hold them off." Mara gave a single sharp nod. She moved toward the central pedestal, where the artifact lay under a protective glass dome. It was unlike anything she had seen before. Its surface pulsed with an unnatural energy, as if alive, its glow shifting from blue to violet in rhythmic waves. The air around it seemed to vibrate, humming with potential. Without hesitation, she drew a small device from her belt, a specialized tool designed to disable the security systems surrounding the artifact. Her fingers danced over the device, working with practiced precision. The glass dome shimmered and then faded, the artifact now exposed. As her fingers brushed against the surface, a surge of energy coursed through her, causing her to flinch. It wasn't a feeling of pain, but something deeper, a connection, a pull, as if the artifact recognized her touch. But there was no time to dwell on it. The wraiths were closing in fast. "Kale, Eris, we're locked in," Mara reported through the comms, her voice steady despite the pressure. "Get to us now." The architect kept his position, scanning the doorway through his weapon's sights. The wraiths were almost there, and their heavy footsteps grew louder, more deliberate. His eyes narrowed as the first figures stepped into the chamber. Dressed in black armor, their faces obscured by helmets, the wraiths moved with lethal grace, each one a ghost in the shadows. "I can't let them get close." The architect fired, the sound of his weapon nearly drowned by the silence of the chamber. A wraith fell, but the others didn't hesitate. They charged, moving in perfect coordination, their rifles raised and ready. The architect ducked behind a pillar, firing again, his aim true, but the wraiths were closing the distance faster than he had anticipated. Meanwhile, Mara had retrieved the artifact, holding it in her gloved hands. It was warm, the energy radiating from it like a pulse. She glanced at the architect, who was now locked in a fierce firefight, his movements swift and calculated. He was giving her the opening she needed. "Move," the architect shouted, ducking behind cover as the wraiths returned fire. His voice was raw, urgent. "We need to get out, now." Mara sprinted toward the exit, the artifact clutched tightly to her chest. She could hear the sound of boots pounding behind her as the wraiths pressed their assault, but she didn't dare look back. They were too close. The only way out was forward. The doors to the vault slammed shut just as the first wraith reached them. Eris and Kale appeared, their faces set in grim determination. "Go," Kale barked, turning toward the approaching enemy. "We'll cover your escape." With a last glance at the architect, who was still holding his ground, Mara bolted. The team had reached the final stretch. The hardest part was yet to come, but at least they had what they came for, the artifact. As Mara reached the corridor leading to the extraction point, she felt the familiar pulse of the ship's engines coming online. The Silent Fang was ready, and the team was almost out, but as the wraiths advanced, a sense of finality gripped her. They had what the Empire had tried to keep hidden, and now it was in their hands. Behind her, the architect's voice crackled through the comms. "Get to the ship. We'll hold them off as long as we can." Mara pushed forward, her heart racing. They were out of time, but they couldn't fail now, not when they were so close. The wraiths might be fast, relentless, but they hadn't faced humanity's silent saboteurs before. The Empire had no idea what they were about to unleash. Mara's heart thundered in her chest as she sprinted through the winding corridors of the Imperial Palace. Every step felt like a race against time, her breath coming in sharp gasps. The artifact, still warm in her hands, was the key to everything. The Empire had kept it hidden for centuries, its power a closely guarded secret. Now it was in their grasp, but the escape was far from assured. Behind her, the sound of heavy boots pounding against the metal floors echoed, the wraiths relentless in their pursuit. They were fast, methodical, and deadly, but Mara was faster. She darted around corners, leaped over obstacles, and slid through narrow passages, her mind solely focused on one thing: survival. As she reached the main access corridor leading to the Silent Fang, she could see Kale and Eris up ahead, their backs against the walls, guns raised. Kale's sharp eyes locked onto hers, and for a brief moment, their gazes met. No words were exchanged, but the message was clear: move fast, or we don't make it out. The wraiths were getting closer, the distant sounds of their pursuit growing louder. Every moment felt like it could be their last. "Covering fire," Kale shouted, pulling the trigger on his blaster as a hail of laser fire erupted from his position. The wraiths were forced to take cover, their advance momentarily halted. Mara didn't hesitate. She pushed forward, her legs carrying her faster than she thought possible. The end of the corridor was in sight. The ship's ramp was down, its engines humming as Eris worked frantically at the controls, his fingers dancing over the interface. "Eris, get us out of here," Mara shouted as she reached the ramp, her voice strained but determined. Eris's face was a mask of concentration as he toggled the switches. "I'm working on it, but the lockdown codes are a mess. They're trying to jam us." "Don't make me come up there," Kale growled, taking another shot at the wraiths, who were inching closer, their weapons raised. The last of the hallway security doors slammed shut behind them, trapping the wraiths on the other side, but that wouldn't hold for long. The Empire would send reinforcements, and soon. The ramp to the Silent Fang started to close, but just as it did, the first wraith charged into the corridor, a figure moving like a blur. Kale fired once, twice, and the wraith went down, but there were more, so many more. "We need to go now," the architect's voice crackled over the comms, tinged with urgency. His warning was clear: they couldn't afford to wait any longer. The ship's engines roared to life, but the ramp was still half closed. Mara's eyes flicked to the doors behind them. An army of wraiths was fast approaching, and they needed a miracle to get away. Without a second thought, she vaulted up the ramp, throwing herself into the ship just as the wraiths reached the edge of the platform. A few more shots rang out, but the ramp finally sealed with a hiss, and the ship lurched forward, narrowly avoiding a deadly ambush. Eris slammed the ship into full reverse, and the sleek black vessel shot out of the Imperial Palace's atmosphere with blistering speed. The massive structure of the capital planet fell away beneath them, and the wraiths were left staring after them, helpless to stop the escape. "We're not out of danger yet," Kale said, wiping sweat from his brow. "They'll be on our tail before long." The architect stood near the cockpit, his eyes scanning the star maps, calculating their next move. "They'll send reinforcements, but we've gained some time. The artifact is in our hands, and the Empire won't know what hit them." Mara stood still for a moment, her pulse still racing, the weight of the artifact in her hands grounding her. It was more than just an object. It was a key to unraveling the Empire's power, and it was now a symbol of humanity's resilience. She had held it in her hands for mere minutes, but already she could feel the power it contained. It was unlike anything she had ever experienced. "Let's get to the rendezvous point," Mara said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "We need to regroup, plan our next move." The architect nodded. "Agreed. We'll have to stay ahead of the Empire at all costs. This artifact is just the beginning." As the ship sailed through the stars, the saboteurs knew one thing for certain. Their mission had only just begun. They had struck a blow against the Empire, but the true battle was still ahead. And the Empire would learn one painful truth: humanity was not so easily defeated. The cold expanse of space stretched endlessly before them as the silent fang cut through the stars. The ship's interior was a quiet hum, the crew moving with practiced efficiency as they prepared for what came next. They had the artifact, the Empire was wounded, and yet Mara couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was wrong. Her fingers gripped the edge of the table, her eyes scanning the data screens that flickered with their flight path. They had made it out of the capital, but only just. The Empire would send more ships after them, more wraiths, more soldiers. The battle wasn't over, and she knew it. "Something feels off," she muttered to herself. The feeling in her gut was gnawing at her, like an unseen storm gathering strength. Kale leaned against the wall, polishing his weapon. "You're still thinking about the wraiths, aren't you?" He gave her a sideways glance. "I get it. They were close, but we're alive. That's what counts." Mara didn't respond. Her instincts were screaming at her. Something was wrong, but she couldn't put her finger on it. Eris, who had been quietly monitoring their surroundings from the cockpit, glanced over his shoulder. "We're clear for now. No sign of pursuit. At least, not yet." The architect stood near the viewport, his hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on the stars. "We need to get to the rendezvous point with the Alliance. It's the safest option we have. Once we get there, we can plan the next phase." "Agreed," Mara said, but the unease still lingered in the pit of her stomach. As the ship drifted toward their destination, the conversation died down, each member lost in their thoughts. The silence was broken only by the occasional hum of the ship's systems. Hours passed in the void, but even as the stars passed by outside, Mara's mind wouldn't stop turning. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. And then it happened. A sudden sharp alarm blared throughout the ship, breaking the stillness. The crew immediately sprang into action. "Eris, what the hell is going on?" Kale shouted, already moving toward the cockpit. Eris's voice crackled through the comms, panicked. "We've been hit. It's a cloaked ship. Something's firing on us. I didn't see it coming." The ship rocked violently, and the dim lights flickered, the ship's shields taking the brunt of the attack. But it wasn't enough. Another volley struck, and the silent fang shuddered under the impact, the hull groaning in protest. The crew struggled to stay on their feet as the ship began to spiral. "The shields are down. We're losing power." Eris's voice was desperate. Mara sprinted toward the cockpit, her breath sharp. The others followed close behind. The ship was in freefall, and the black void of space outside was now taunting them. They had been ambushed, someone had found them, and they hadn't seen it coming. The architect pushed through the door, his expression cold, calculating. "Get us out of here, Eris. We can't stay in this trajectory. If we don't get out now, We'll be dead before we even hit the atmosphere. I'm trying. Eris snapped, his hands flying over the controls, but it was clear the damage was severe. The ship was crippled. Someone's guiding the fire, Kale said, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the readouts. They're targeting our engines, hitting us precisely where it hurts. Mara's blood ran cold. We've been set up. The architect looked at her sharply. What do you mean? The Empire didn't know we had the artifact until after we left. Whoever is hitting us now, they've been tracking us. A sickening realization began to form. This wasn't just a random attack. This wasn't the Empire. This was someone else. Someone on the inside, Mara murmured, her voice low, the weight of betrayal sinking in. The architect's eyes narrowed. Who? Just then, the communication system pinged, a transmission coming through loud and clear. The image on the screen was distorted, but the voice was unmistakable. Did you really think you could escape from the Empire's reach, Saboteurs? You've been useful, but you're no longer needed. Mara froze, her stomach dropping. The voice belonged to someone she knew all too well, someone she trusted, someone she had fought beside. It was Eris. Eris, the architect barked, his voice filled with disbelief. What the hell are you doing? Eris turned slowly, a wicked smile spreading across his face, a look of cold calculation in his eyes. You think I'm on your side? You're all just pawns. The Empire promised me more than you ever could. I'm not going to let you stand in my way. Mara's fists clenched. The feeling of betrayal, of being blindsided, hit her like a physical blow. They had been played. The artifact? She whispered, the weight of the question hanging in the air. Eris nodded slowly. It's just the beginning. The Empire will have it soon, and you'll be gone before you even know what hit you. He turned away, signaling the end of the transmission. A traitor in their midst. The saboteurs had been set up, and now they were falling into a deadly game with no way out. The silence in the cockpit was suffocating, as if the weight of Eris's betrayal had pressed down on everyone in the room. The ship lurched again, and Mara gripped the armrest tightly to steady herself. Eris, once a trusted ally, was now their enemy, and the reality of it was more crushing than the physical damage to the silent Fang. Mara turned to the architect, her mind racing. What now? He didn't answer immediately. His gaze was focused on the screen, where the looming shape of an enemy ship appeared from the dark void of space, its sleek, imposing silhouette reflecting the cold stars. Its engines flared with ominous light as it closed in on their crippled vessel. We fight, the architect said, his voice cold and unyielding, even as he grasped the control panel, activating emergency defenses. We might be outgunned, but we still have the artifact. And as long as we're alive, we still have a chance. Mara felt a spark of hope in his words, but it was fleeting. The realization that their mission had been compromised weighed heavily on her heart. The alliance they were heading towered. Their alliance had just become a lie. The artifact wasn't just a weapon for revolution. It was now the most coveted prize in the galaxy, and Eris was going to hand it right to the Empire. A loud, jarring impact rocked the ship, and the lights flickered once more. The silent Fang was taking heavy fire, each shot compromising their stability further. Kale rushed in, weapons in hand. We're not going down without a fight. I've rigged the remaining blasters for an all-out assault. Eris had always been unpredictable, but this level of betrayal was something they couldn't have foreseen. He was one of them, a key part of their team, their brother. And now he had sold them out for his own gain. We need a plan, Mara said, her tone tight with frustration. There's no way we can fight them head-on. Our shields are down. We're sitting ducks. We can't stay here, the architect replied. His eyes were already calculating their next move. We need to get out of the line of fire, get the artifact into the Silent Fang's vault. The worst thing we can do right now is let Eris and that ship get their hands on it. Mara nodded, already moving toward the ship's vault. Kale, you're with me. We need to get the artifact secured. The rest of you, hold them off." Kale gave her a tight nod before heading to the ship's outer turrets. Eris and his new allies would be relentless, but they wouldn't know what hit them. "Be careful," the architect said, his eyes meeting Mara's as she made her way to the vault. His voice was calm, but there was a fire in his eyes. "This is our last chance. We fight for humanity's future, no matter the cost." Mara didn't respond. She had no time for words. As soon as she reached the vault, she could feel the artifact pulsing against her chest again. She knew what it meant, what it could do. But with the enemy closing in, there was no time to examine it further. The ship's corridors were dark, save for the blinking emergency lights, and the sudden sound of blaster fire echoed in the distance. "Lock it down now," Mara ordered, her voice sharp as she activated the security protocols on the vault's door. The heavy door slammed shut with a hiss. Meanwhile, Kale was already on the outer turrets, firing relentlessly at the pursuing ships. His shots were precise, targeting their weak points with brutal efficiency. The Silent Fang's shields flickered but held, giving them just enough time to evade the worst of the fire. "Their ship's hull is taking damage," Kale reported over the comms. "But they're still in pursuit. We need to buy more time." Mara took a deep breath, gathering herself. "Do whatever it takes. We're not going down today." In the cockpit, the architect was at the helm, his hands flying over the controls as the Silent Fang banked hard to the left, narrowly avoiding a volley of enemy fire. His calculations were precise, but the enemy was closing in. Mara's thoughts were a blur as she raced through the ship to rejoin the others. Eris had betrayed them, but they couldn't dwell on that now. The galaxy was still at stake. Humanity's future still depended on the choices they made in these final moments. "Eris is coming in hot," Kale warned as the enemy ship locked in on their position. They were within striking distance now. "We have one shot," Mara said, her voice steely with resolve. "Hold on tight. We're getting out of here." With a final powerful thrust, the Silent Fang darted toward the approaching enemy ship, its engines flaring as it prepared for the final maneuver. The crew was ready for what came next. They had no choice now but to fight for survival and for the future of the galaxy.